The fire raged like something out of a nightmare. Flames licked the sides of the barn I had built with my own hands. Thick black smoke poured into the sky as the wood cracked and exploded. My horses screamed in terror from the back pasture, and I could hear the faint wail of sirens in the distance. But by the time they would get here, everything I loved, everything I had worked for, would be gone. I had just returned from town with a bag of feed in my truck when I saw it. My ranch was on fire. Not a small fire from a brush pile or a spark from a machine. This was full-blown arson. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't an accident. It was planned. And the part that still gives me chills? Spray painted on the mailbox in big red letters were the words, "Shoulda joined the HOA." I stood there frozen, my heart pounding like a drum. My hands were shaking as I called 911. I already knew deep down who had done this. They'd been threatening me for months, but I never thought they'd actually go this far. Then I saw it. A black SUV speeding away from behind my property, straight from the service road the HOA used to access the nearby lots. And in that moment, I swore, they messed with the wrong rancher. Let me take you back to where it all started. Before the fire, before the spray paint, before I ever knew what a homeowners association was capable of. 6 months ago, I moved to rural Texas from Arizona. My name's Troy Caldwell. I'm 43, a veteran, and after leaving the service, I saved for years to buy my dream ranch. I found a beautiful 15-acre property sitting just outside of a fancy gated community called Whispering Pines. The ranch had no HOA ties and the deed clearly said so. That was the whole point. I wanted freedom. I wanted to plant what I wanted, ride my horses. "Good morning," he said, fake smile plastered on. "I'm president of the Whispering Pines HOA. We're excited to welcome you to our family." "I'm not in your family," I replied, not even inviting him past the gate. He pointed toward the community behind my property. "Well, technically you share access roads and landscape views. That gives us jurisdiction." I almost laughed in his face. "No, sir. My land deed says I'm independent. You've got nothing over me." He cleared his throat, annoyed. "We'll see about that." That was the first time I sensed just how petty and powerful these HOA folks could be. The next week, someone slashed 2 of my tires. Then my water supply line got mysteriously damaged. I installed cameras after that. I also got a lawyer. Things seemed to calm down for a while. I thought maybe they'd finally backed off. But then I hosted a 4th of July party. A few fellow veterans came over, and we did some skeet shooting behind the barn, had a small bonfire and grilled ribs. Nothing wild, no music blasting, just old friends catching up. The very next morning, I found a fresh envelope stuck under my windshield wiper. "Noise complaints, fire hazard, public disturbance, register your property with Whispering Pines HOA immediately or face a community lawsuit." That was the moment I knew they weren't going to stop until I either sold my ranch or signed their stupid documents. I took the letter to my lawyer, a bulldog of a woman named Martha Sims. She squinted at it, then smirked. "They have no authority. Let them sue. We'll bury them." Still, something didn't sit right with me. 2 weeks later, my barn lights were shot out. Not broken, shot. With a pellet gun, I guessed. My cameras didn't catch it. Someone must have known where the blind spots were. A scare tactic. So I filed a police report, and I made something very clear to the HOA. I wasn't joining. Ever. Then things went quiet again. Suspiciously quiet. The days turned into weeks. I started repairing the barn, replacing the lights, planting again. And then came the fire. I had gone into town to grab supplies. My property was empty except for my animals out back. When I returned, the front barn was already in flames. It happened fast. Too fast. I later learned from the fire department that the blaze started in 3 different places, meaning someone lit it on purpose. They found evidence of accelerants. It wasn't an accident. As I stood there watching the fire consume everything, my tools, my hay, my memories, I felt something snap inside me. Not fear, not sorrow, rage. Because this wasn't just a fire. This was war. And they had just fired the first real shot. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my truck, shotgun by my side, waiting in case they came back. My lawyer came by in the morning after I called her. I showed her the mailbox. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "We're suing them for every dollar they've got." I nodded. 600,000. That's what I lost. Barn, animals, equipment, fencing, vehicles. "We'll start with that," she said. But just as we finished speaking, I noticed something odd behind the ashes of the barn. A melted piece of metal. It looked like a piece of a gas can, but it had a sticker on it. A sticker from Whispering Pines Landscaping Company. My breath caught in my chest. I pointed. "That's from them. I've seen their trucks around." Martha walked over, crouched, and stared. Then she stood up slowly and said one thing that chilled me to my core. "Troy, they were on your property." And right then the wind shifted and carried a smell from the ashes. Gasoline. The fire investigators confirmed it the next day. Gasoline was used to start the blaze, and not just any gasoline. It had traces of a red dye additive often used by commercial landscaping companies. I handed over the melted Whispering Pines landscaping sticker to the fire chief myself. He looked at it, looked at me, then sighed and muttered, "This smells like more than just a fire." I said nothing, just nodded. But inside I was burning hotter than that barn ever had. Later that evening, my lawyer Martha called with more fuel for the fire. "They've lawyered up," she said. "Who?" I asked, pacing my living room floor that now stank of smoke and ash even from 100 feet away. "Whispering Pines HOA. Their president Brandon Holbrook hired legal counsel this morning. Guess what for?" "Let me guess. They're planning to sue me again?" "Worse. They're claiming you started the fire yourself, for insurance." I stopped dead in my tracks. "You're kidding." "I wish I were. They're trying to flip the narrative before we can take action." "Do they even know I don't have insurance on the barn yet? I was about to finalize the paperwork this week." She paused. Then they picked the wrong lie to tell. Over the next few days, investigators came, news reporters sniffed around, and neighbors from the nearby gated community acted like I was the one who brought trouble into their peaceful utopia. I stayed quiet. Let them talk. But behind closed doors, Martha and I were building our case. She filed a formal lawsuit against Whispering Pines Homeowners Association and Brandon Holbrook personally for property damage, intimidation, trespassing, and emotional distress. Total, $600,000. We weren't playing anymore. I started rebuilding. Friends from my veteran support group came by to help. Old hands who knew how to swing a hammer, fix a gate, dig a post hole. One of them, Steve, an ex-Marine with a limp, handed me a generator and said, "You held the line for this country, brother. Now we hold it for you." It meant everything. While we worked, I installed new motion sensor cameras, thermal too, and I bought a 200-pound livestock guard dog named Gunner, half Great Pyrenees, half Mastiff, all business. Things were slowly coming back to life. My horses were okay, thank God. I had to move them to a friend's ranch down the road temporarily, but they were safe. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling something worse was coming. And I was right. One morning, I woke up to banging on my front door. Not a knock. A bang. Gunner barked like mad, and I grabbed my shotgun, ready for anything. When I opened the door, I saw 3 sheriff deputies. One of them held a file in his hand. The other 2 stood like bodyguards. "Mr. Caldwell?" the lead deputy asked. "Yes, sir." "We have a warrant to inspect your property in connection to suspected fraud and arson." I blinked. "Fraud? Arson? Are you serious?" "I'm afraid we are." They didn't arrest me, but they walked all over my property, took pictures, poked around the barn ruins like I was the criminal. I called Martha the moment they left. She cursed under her breath. "They're trying to bury you under false accusations before our lawsuit gets traction." But they made a mistake. Because one of the deputies, Deputy Samuels, was from the next county. And his sister? She was one of the women from my veteran group who came to help rebuild. He later confessed to her that the HOA had paid a private investigator to dig into my background. They were trying to frame me for everything, claiming I was unstable, dangerous, and antisocial, which, by the way, is rich coming from people who literally burned my property down because I didn't want to attend their monthly BBQs or pay for their lawn service. I felt like I was trapped in some dystopian nightmare. Still, we pressed on. We filed restraining orders against Brandon and 2 HOA members who had trespassed before. The court granted temporary protection, but the damage to my reputation was already underway. The local news ran a story titled, "Veteran Rancher or Firebug, HOA and Resident Locked in Legal Firestorm." They used a picture of me taken from Facebook from a camping trip where I looked wild and scruffy like some doomsday prepper. Martha told me not to worry. This is the kind of story juries hate. HOA burns down your land, then calls you the problem. It's classic overreach. People don't like bullies. But I didn't want to win just in court. I wanted the truth to come out. So I started telling my story. Online, in vet forums, on local radio, even Reddit. People began rallying behind me. Dozens of others from across the country messaged me with their own HOA horror stories. It was like I had unlocked some hidden door. But as I started speaking out, something else happened. One night, around 3 a.m., Gunnar went wild. I shot up out of bed, heart thudding. I grabbed my gun, switched on the floodlights outside, and that's when I saw it. Spray paint again. This time, not on the mailbox. It was on the side of my house. In big red letters, "Drop the case or else." And underneath it, a dead squirrel nailed to my fence post. I stared at the red letters painted across the siding of my home, heart racing. Drop the case or else. My fists clenched. The dead squirrel nailed to my fence post wasn't just some twisted joke. It was a threat, a warning. Gunnar growled beside me, his teeth bared, his body tense like he was ready to tear someone apart. I took a shaky breath and called the sheriff. Again. They arrived 20 minutes later. This time it was Deputy Ward, an older guy, been in the county for 30 years, always wore mirrored sunglasses even at night. He looked at the message, the dead animal, and the camera footage I handed him. He didn't say much, but his jaw tightened. "They're escalating," he said. I nodded. "They want to scare me, but they're only making me stronger." That morning I had to scrub the spray paint off the wall myself. No one from Whispering Pines came over, no apology, no denial, just silence. The kind that screams guilt. Martha filed a police complaint for criminal intimidation. She also requested the judge fast-track our case citing harassment and retaliation. Meanwhile, word kept spreading online. My story was going viral in rancher forums, homeowner rights groups, and veteran communities. People were angry. People were watching. And that made the HOA nervous. Brandon Holbrook, their smug president, tried to do damage control. He released a public statement through his lawyer claiming, "Whispering Pines HOA has no involvement in the unfortunate fire on Mr. Caldwell's property. Any attempt to link our organization to criminal behavior is defamatory." But no one bought it, especially not when someone leaked a series of emails. It started when a woman named Lisa Kendrick, a former HOA board member, reached out to me anonymously. She said she'd resigned 2 months ago when she started feeling sick about what the HOA was planning. I convinced her to come forward. She sent over 3 emails between Brandon and the rest of the board. One line stood out above the rest. "If he refuses to join, we'll make it impossible for him to stay. Either he sells or he folds." And another, "We can't let an outsider deface the view of our community. His barn's a rotten tooth on a perfect smile." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. It was never about rules or codes. It was about control, power, vanity. Lisa agreed to give a statement in court. That was our breakthrough. Martha's voice shook with excitement when she called me. "This is enough to bury them, Troy. We've got motive, threats, and now insider proof. I wanted to feel hope, but I knew they weren't done. Not yet, because 2 days later someone cut my water line again. The main pipe underground. No water. In Texas heat. For a man with livestock. I called a plumber who confirmed it had been tampered with. Again. I was furious and exhausted. But I didn't back down. We reported the damage and updated the case. By now the HOA's lawyer was sweating. I heard through the grapevine they tried to offer a settlement, $50,000 and a quiet agreement to go away. I refused. I wasn't just in this for money anymore. I was fighting for every homeowner who'd been bullied, every rancher pushed out, every veteran ignored. But Brandon? He didn't get it. He thought I'd cave, until he made one more fatal mistake. One morning, as I was checking the new camera feeds, I saw something that stopped my breath. 2 HOA board members, James and Patricia, walking on the back edge of my property near the burned barn ruins. They were carrying something, a canister, and something else, rolled up paper. They stayed for just a few minutes looking around nervously. Then they walked back toward the Whispering Pines Trail access point. I zoomed in on the footage and froze. The canister had a flammable warning label. And the papers? Blueprints. They were planning something again. Maybe another fire. Maybe worse. I printed the footage and drove straight to the sheriff's department. Deputy Ward watched the video 3 times. Then he said, "You know what this means, right?" I nodded. They're coming again. That night I stayed up with a rifle in my lap, gunner at my feet, and floodlights bathing the property in white light. I didn't sleep. The next morning I noticed something new. A legal notice had been taped to my gate. It was from the HOA. A cease and desist demanding I remove defamatory content online, withdraw the lawsuit, and cease unauthorized video surveillance of Whispering Pines community members. I laughed out loud. They were caught on camera trespassing, with what looked like arson tools, and they were accusing me of a crime. That was when I called a press conference, right on my ranch. With the ruined barn still behind me and my dog at my side, I stood in front of a dozen local and regional news cameras and told the full story. I showed them the footage. I showed them the threats. I read the cease and desist out loud, then ripped it in half. "We don't negotiate with criminals," I said into the mic. The crowd of reporters went silent. Then someone clapped. Then others. It was on the evening news by 6 p.m. The story was everywhere. That night, while watching the coverage on my couch, I heard a crash. A real one. Glass shattering. I ran to the front room and found a cinder block thrown through my window. Attached to it was a note, 4 words. "This is your last." Glass crunched under my boots as I picked up the cinder block from my living room floor. The wind blew softly through the shattered window, but my hands were trembling with fury. I unfolded the crumpled paper tied to the block. The message was short. Cold. "This is your last." Last what? Last warning? Last day? Last breath? I didn't know. But I knew this. Whoever threw that block wasn't just angry. They were desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. Gunner stood stiff at the doorway, growling low. His ears pointed toward the road like he was listening for something I couldn't hear. I grabbed my shotgun and scanned the front yard. The shadows danced in the moonlight. No cars, no figures, no footprints. Whoever did it was long gone. But I wasn't going to sit around waiting for the next threat. I called the sheriff, again, and made my 10th report in under 2 months. Deputy Ward showed up, jaw set, eyes tired. He looked at the broken window, the note, then at me. "We'll add it to the report," he said. "That's it?" I snapped. "They've burned my barn, trespassed, cut my water line, spray-painted threats, and now they're throwing bricks through my window? If I hadn't been in the back room, that could have hit me." Ward raised both hands. "Troy, believe me, I want to do more, but until we catch them in the act, all we have is suspicion." Well then, I said, I guess I'll do the catching myself. That night I upgraded everything. 4 new cameras, thermal, motion sensing, night vision, floodlights with sirens. I even installed a pressure alarm on my driveway that would buzz if anyone stepped foot past the gate. Gunnar got a new reinforced doghouse with cameras installed around his post too. They thought they were watching me. But now I was watching them. Martha filed a motion the next day to request an emergency court hearing. The evidence was stacking up and the judge approved it. A formal trial date was set, 6 weeks from now. That gave us one last push to gather final evidence. And right on cue, they slipped. 3 days later, Lisa Kendrick, the former HOA board member who'd already turned whistleblower, called me again. Her voice was shaky. Troy, you're not going to believe what I just found. Try me, I said. I was going through some old emails I'd forwarded to myself for backup, and I found one from Brandon. He forwarded an invoice from a landscaping crew dated a day before the fire. It included an item called fuel storage barrels, off-site use. My breath caught. That's not standard for landscaping. I know, and it was billed to the HOA, not a personal expense. She emailed the invoice to Martha immediately. It showed they paid for fuel barrels, likely gasoline, the day before my barn caught fire. Boom, motive, timeline, payment trail. Martha nearly screamed on the phone. We've got them. Oh, we've got them now. It felt like we were finally turning the tide. But just as things began to tilt in our favor, they threw one more punch. This one wasn't through the mail or over the fence. It was in person. It happened while I was driving home from town. As I turned down the last road before my ranch, a black Escalade swerved into my lane. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching. The SUV stopped sideways, blocking the road completely. I barely stopped in time. Then out stepped Brandon Holbrook, wearing sunglasses, button-down shirt, dress shoes, like he just came from a board meeting, and he wasn't alone. 2 other men stepped out. One of them had a crowbar, the other had gloves on. Brandon walked up to my driver's side window and tapped it. I rolled it down halfway, my phone already recording in my lap. You're making a mess, Troy, he said. I stared straight ahead. Get out of the road. You think you're going to win? You're not. You're just another bitter vet with a chip on his shoulder. Nobody's going to believe you over us. Tell that to the cameras, I said, turning my phone slightly so he could see it recording. He paused. The other 2 shifted uncomfortably. You're going to drop the lawsuit, Brandon said, voice harder now. Or you'll be buried in court so deep you'll forget what sunlight looks like. I leaned forward. You already burned down my barn, I said slowly. If you think threats scare me now, you don't know the first thing about the kind of man I am. I put the truck in reverse and started backing away. They didn't chase me, but Brandon kept watching, that smug smile faltering just a bit. When I got home, I filed a restraining order against him personally. Again. This time we had video, real footage of him issuing threats, blocking public roadways and approaching me with what clearly looked like backup muscle. The court accepted it. Now he couldn't come within 500 feet of me, or my property. We filed the footage as evidence, alongside the leaked invoice, the spray paint threats, the dead squirrel, the broken window, and the tampered water line. The trial was shaping up to be an absolute bloodbath, but just before we hit the courtroom, there was one last twist. One of my new driveway alarms buzzed at 2:17 a.m. I checked the live feed from my phone in bed. At first I saw nothing. Then I spotted it, someone crawling through the tall grass, military style, toward the edge of my rebuilt shed. They were holding something, a bottle, and a lighter. I zoomed in. It wasn't Brandon. It wasn't James or Patricia. It was a teen, barely 17, wearing a Whispering Pines volunteer cleanup crew shirt, and he was carrying a Molotov cocktail. The teenager crouched in the grass holding a Molotov cocktail just yards from my newly rebuilt shed. My heart pounded as I watched the live security feed, hand trembling over the panic button. Gunnar was already growling, sensing danger even before I moved. I hit the alarm. The entire property lit up like a football stadium. Sirens blared. The teen flinched, then dropped the bottle. Thankfully, it didn't break, and tried to crawl backward before standing and taking off at a full sprint through the field. I wasn't about to chase him. I had what I needed. Crystal clear footage, face visible, shirt bearing the Whispering Pines volunteer cleanup crew logo. Within minutes, deputies were on scene. Deputy Ward reviewed the footage and said exactly what I was thinking. That's Jason Rourke. The name hit me like a cold wind. I knew his father, Henry Rourke, a loudmouth from the HOA who had once shouted at a town hall that my ranch was lowering property values. Ward radioed in the suspect. By morning, Jason was in custody, and just like that, the HOA's plans began unraveling faster than a cheap tarp in a windstorm. Jason cracked within an hour of questioning. The kid was scared, real scared, and once he started talking, the whole thing poured out. He admitted the HOA board promised him a $500 gift card to teach Caldwell a lesson. They told him not to worry, that I'd be asleep and wouldn't see anything, that it was just to spook me. Jason confessed they'd given him the bottle, the fuel, and even drawn a map of where to light the fire for maximum impact. It was all in writing, text messages, printed directions, and receipts. The sheriff's department took it all. Martha couldn't believe it. They used a teenager as a pawn in their arson plot. This isn't just a civil suit anymore. It's criminal conspiracy. The less extreme part? With Jason's testimony, the sheriff's office officially opened a criminal investigation into the HOA board members. It wasn't just me versus them now. It was State of Texas versus Whispering Pines HOA. The trial was pushed back to allow for criminal evidence to be entered into the civil case. Martha called it a gift in disguise. She spent the extra time preparing for a courtroom massacre. Meanwhile, I got busy rebuilding trust, not with neighbors, but with myself. The trauma had built up. I wasn't sleeping. I was jumping at every sound. I couldn't even light a campfire without my heart racing. So I started small. I went fishing. I fixed the porch swing. I brought Gunner with me everywhere, even inside the feed store where he became a local favorite. I met with a group of veterans at the town rec center and told them my story. Some cried. One of them, an old Marine named Phil, said, "I wish I'd stood up to the people who tried to run me off my land years ago. You did what most of us were too tired to do." That meant something. Things felt calm again, quiet, until the week before trial. I got a letter. Not in the mailbox, nailed to my front gate. It was typed. No return address. No signature. "If you show up in court, you'll regret it. There won't be a second fire, it'll be final." I stood there staring at it as Gunner paced beside me. Final? They were threatening my life now. I held the letter in my hand for what felt like a lifetime. The words were simple, cold, final. "If you show up in court, you'll regret it. There won't be a second fire. It'll be final." This wasn't just about scaring me anymore. This was personal. This was someone telling me they were willing to cross every line, willing to risk prison, willing to take my life just to protect a crooked HOA from facing consequences. And I'd be lying if I said it didn't shake me. For the first time since the fire, I considered packing up and leaving. I stared at that letter with Gunner by my side, wondering what kind of evil was living just a few miles from me. I had faced danger before, on foreign soil, wearing camouflage and carrying a rifle. But this was different. This was home. This was supposed to be peace. But then I looked at my land, my shed, my rebuilt barn, my fields, and I remembered something my grandfather once said. "You don't leave your house because of termites. You burn the nest." So no, I wasn't going anywhere. I called Martha and forwarded the threat. She was silent for a moment on the phone. Then she said, "Troy, I'm doubling your security. I'm also filing an emergency motion with the judge. You're not just a victim anymore. You're a target in an active criminal investigation." That same day, law enforcement installed 2 mobile patrol units near my ranch entrance, and a sheriff's deputy started making twice-a-day checks. I upgraded my cameras again, added reinforced shutters on my windows, and put in a silent panic alarm directly wired to the sheriff's office. But the real war was about to begin in court. The trial date came. A heavy sky rolled over the town that morning, clouds pressing down like the world knew something big was about to happen. I arrived at the courthouse early. Brandon Holbrook showed up in a navy blue suit and aviator sunglasses, trying to look like some misunderstood leader instead of a man who'd overseen the destruction of my life. Behind him came the other board members, Patricia, James, and Henry Rourke, father of the teen arsonist. They didn't look confident anymore. They looked like people praying for a miracle that wouldn't come. The courtroom was packed. Local reporters were lined against the walls. Veterans I hadn't seen in months showed up in quiet support. And on the right side of the room, a surprising number of Whispering Pines residents. Turns out not everyone in the HOA supported the madness. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. Martha rose first. She opened with the video of the teen, Jason Rourke, caught red-handed with the Molotov cocktail. The jury watched in dead silence as the footage played on a giant monitor. Then she introduced Jason's testimony, every word typed and signed under oath. The boy had admitted that Brandon Holbrook offered him $500 to scare Mr. Caldwell, that he was handed the supplies, that the HOA board had cheered him on like a prank. The judge looked sick. The jury looked furious. Next, Martha called Lisa Kendrick to the stand, the whistleblower. She described in painful detail how the HOA board had planned the slow removal of Troy Caldwell from the neighborhood's view. She spoke of emails titled Operation Cleanup and Property Vision Alignment. Then came the letter, the final threat I'd received. The courtroom grew cold as Martha displayed the typed message. There won't be a second fire. It'll be final. She turned to the jury and said calmly, this wasn't just harassment. This was terrorism, on U.S. soil, by a neighborhood committee. Then it was the defense's turn. Brandon's lawyer argued that all of it was coincidence, that the fire was unrelated, that the teen acted alone, that the letter was likely a forgery written by Mr. Caldwell to gain sympathy. That's when Martha dropped the bomb. A forensic expert had matched the printer ink of the letter to Brandon's office printer. Boom. The jury gasped. Even the judge looked stunned. Brandon's mouth fell open. His lawyer paled. That was it. The case was sealed. But the final blow? It came from the HOA's own financial records. Martha obtained banking logs showing an unaccounted withdrawal of $2,300 from the HOA account days before the fire, money labeled miscellaneous property maintenance. Guess where that withdrawal went? To a shell landscaping company registered under James Tillman's cousin's name. That landscaping company, according to Jason, was the same one that dropped off the fuel containers. The jury didn't even need to deliberate long. After just 3 hours, they returned. Verdict: guilty. On conspiracy to commit property destruction, criminal harassment, and endangerment. The jury awarded me $600,000 in total damages, and more than just money, they ordered the dissolution of the Whispering Pines HOA board and issued restraining orders against Brandon and 2 others. As they read the verdict, Brandon Holbrook sat motionless. His lawyer leaned into his ear, whispering. Patricia burst into quiet tears. James stared at the floor like it had betrayed him. And I just closed my eyes. It wasn't victory I felt. It was relief. After months of hell, nights spent listening for footsteps, mornings smelling smoke that wasn't there, days fighting to prove I wasn't crazy, I had finally won. I called a press conference. Again. This time, right on the courthouse steps, microphones, cameras, reporters, HOA members watching from behind sunglasses and lowered hats. I held up the forged document. This, I said to the cameras, is how cowards fight. They don't come at you face to face. They hide behind paper. But we're not living in the shadows anymore. I explained the entire situation, from fire to lawsuit to attempted zoning fraud. I even read from the trial transcript the words of Jason Rourke, the teen they used as bait. And then I made my final move. I am filing a federal civil suit against the newly formed Whispering Pines Board and will pursue criminal charges for forgery. This wasn't about land anymore. It was about setting a precedent. Across the country, HOAs had gained more power than most local governments, and when they went unchecked, they became mobs with logos. Not in my town. Not again. The public outcry was instant. County officials issued a cease order on all Whispering Pines zoning activity pending investigation. But that's not what broke them. What broke them came 2 weeks later. A federal prosecutor opened a criminal case, not just against Brandon Holbrook and the original board, but against the newly elected board too. Turns out one of them was Brandon's cousin using her maiden name. Another was his college roommate. They'd built a shadow board to continue Brandon's agenda even after his conviction. And now they were facing federal charges for conspiracy, forgery, and fraud. By the time the dust settled, the HOA was dead. Not rebranded. Dismantled. County officials dissolved its corporate charter. Residents voted 82% in favor of removing all HOA management structures from their neighborhood. And Whispering Pines? It went back to being just a gated street. No more fines, no more patrols. Just neighbors again. Some of them even apologized to me. Not with money or words, but with action. A group of them came over one morning, led by an older couple named Beth and Jeremy Langford. They brought tools, paint, plants, wood. "We know what they did to you," Jeremy said, "and we stood by too long. Let us help fix your fence line and rebuild that corner of your shed." They didn't need to, but I let them. Not because I needed help, but because they needed to make it right. It took all morning, and when they finished, Beth placed a sign in the dirt outside my fence. A wooden sign, hand-painted. Independent land, home of the free. We left it there. Months passed, seasons changed, and I started sleeping again. The land healed, and so did I. One evening, as the sun set across my fields and the barn glowed gold in the light, I sat on the porch with Gunnar at my feet, thinking about everything we'd been through. I remembered that night I first saw the fire, the way the flames ate my dreams. I remembered the broken window, the block, the threats. But most of all, I remembered what I learned. Freedom always comes with a cost. And when people try to steal it with fear, fire, or force, you don't bend. You don't run. You fight back. Because home isn't just where you live, it's what you protect, and this ranch, this land, it's mine. No HOA, no board, no signature can ever take that from me again.